The skies over planet Avon were quiet. Too quiet. Captain Down of the Varnock species stood tall on the observation deck of the dread cruiser Fang of Might. His black armor shimmered under the red lights of the command room. He was a member of the apex race, predators of the galaxy, feared by every species from the edges of the rim to the core worlds. Until now, no enemy had lasted more than 3 days against a full Varnock assault. They called themselves the Kings of War, but something had changed. A message had arrived 3 weeks ago. A small mining world, under Varnock control, had gone silent. No distress signals, no survivors. All systems flatlined. Down's orders were simple: investigate and crush whoever was responsible. His fleet, 10 warships, 20,000 elite soldiers, moved toward a blue-green planet named Earth. The Varnock command believed this Earth was just another backwater planet. Home to a low-tech species of strange, warm-blooded bipeds called humans. They can't even survive on half the death worlds we train on, one officer had joked, but deep inside, Down wasn't laughing. The silence of the mining world still echoed in his thoughts. On Earth, things weren't quiet. In a command bunker deep beneath the Andes Mountains, Commander Reed sat before a glowing screen. His face was calm, but his voice was sharp. We've detected them, Varnock warships. 10 vessels. They are coming fast. The room was filled with humans, scientists, strategists, soldiers. No panic. Just action. Deploy Ghost Net, Reed ordered. A technician blinked. Already? We don't know if they'll strike. Reed turned slowly. They will. Back on the Fang of Might, Down narrowed his eyes at the scanner. His fleet was entering the outer solar belt. The asteroid field was clear. Too clear. Where are their defenses? His second-in-command asked. Down stared forward. That's the wrong question. Ask where are they hiding. At that moment, a small object floated into view. It wasn't a ship. It looked like a satellite. Small. Broken, harmless, one officer said. Down nodded. Fire at it anyway. A beam of red light struck the satellite. For a second, it glowed, then exploded, but instead of fragments flying away, something strange happened. The debris seemed to vanish mid-air. Down's eyes widened. It was watching us. Then the alarms blared, unknown vessels approaching. Stealth class. From the shadows of the asteroid field, 3 ships emerged. Sleek, black, and silent, human ships, not bulky like Varnock vessels. No banners. No threat displays, just precision. Down stood. Engage. Show them who rules this galaxy. But within seconds, the battlefield turned into a trap. The lead human ship fired no main cannon. Instead, a dozen drone pods launched from its underbelly, each moving faster than any Varnock tech. One Varnock destroyer exploded before anyone could speak. The war had begun. The Varnock warship Fang of Might shook violently as 2 more explosions rocked the space around it. Captain Down gripped the edge of the command table, staring at the screen. 2 of his ships were gone, just gone, in the first few minutes of battle. No warning. No contact. No mercy. How? The weapons officer shouted. Our shields weren't even touched. They just cut through. Down's voice dropped low and sharp. Because we are not fighting farmers. We are fighting something smarter. On the screen, the human ships moved like ghosts. They didn't fly in a line, didn't charge head-on. They circled, vanished, reappeared, and struck like hunters. This wasn't a war. It was a trap. In the deep command bunker on Earth, Commander Reed watched the silent footage coming in from orbit. One of the human captains, a woman named Kale, gave a short nod over comms. 2 confirmed. 3rd limping. Reed replied calmly. No speeches. No glory. Just send them a message. Kale smiled faintly. Message sent. Earth didn't need to boast. The humans weren't trying to scare the Varnock, they were simply defending what was theirs. Quietly. Effectively. In the past, humans had been called many things: unpredictable, emotional, reckless, but this was not the humanity the galaxy knew. Before, this was a new age. Down stood over a hologram map of the solar system. Pull back. Restructure the formation. Bring in the second wave from the rear. His officers looked at him in shock. You want to retreat? Down growled. It's not a retreat. It's a correction. We attacked blind. Now we strike with eyes open. One officer hesitated. What if they are like us? Down turned. There is no species like us. But even he wasn't sure anymore. Out in space, the humans didn't chase. That confused the Varnock even more. They are letting us pull back. Down asked aloud. No answer. In truth, humans had already predicted this move. The trap had been laid from the start. Now Earth watched, studied, calculated. Behind every decision was purpose. Behind every calm command was centuries of learning how to survive and how to end wars fast. Commander Reed reviewed the incoming scans. They are regrouping. Second wave is moving into the rear position. Classic Varnock pincer setup. He tapped the screen. But they don't realize they are inside our net now. Net, one young officer asked. Reed looked up. Operation Whisper Fang. We've been preparing it for years. Years, yes. Because humanity knew one day the apex would come, and humans never wanted to start a war, but they prepared for it anyway. Back aboard the Varnock ship Claw of Stone, Rear Commander Voss barked, second wave in place. Orders. Down hesitated. For the first time in years, his instincts didn't scream for attack, they whispered something else. Fear, hold position, he ordered slowly, but it was already too late. A sudden pulse echoed through space, just one beat. A signal, and then dozens of human ships lit up from within the asteroid field, previously cloaked, now revealed. They were surrounded, but no messages came. No demands. No warning, just the silence of Deathworlders who didn't talk when it was time to act. Captain Down stared at the glowing red symbols on his screen. Surrounded, every angle was covered by human ships. Small, fast, silent, positioned like they had studied the Varnock for years. Pull the fleet into tight formation. Down barked, but the human ships didn't charge. They waited. It was as if they were watching the Varnock's every move, waiting for mistakes. Down's second in command whispered, Sir. They don't fight like anyone we've ever faced. Down clenched his jaw. Because they are not fighting. They are hunting. In the darkness of the asteroid belt, human ships didn't shine. They didn't blink. Even their heat signatures were suppressed. Each one was a floating blade, sharp, ready. On board the Phantom Star, Captain Kale watched the Varnock Titan formation. They are afraid, she said quietly. Her second nodded. We've never seen them afraid. Kale's voice remained calm. That's the difference between predators and hunters. Predators charge. Hunters plan. She leaned forward. Ready the message. In the Varnock command room, a soft beep caught everyone's attention. Incoming signal, the comms officer said. Human language. Translated. Down gave a short nod. Play it. A voice came through. Calm. Cold. Human. This is Earth Defense Command. You started this war. You have one chance to leave our system. Do not test how far we'll go. Silence, then. A second message. Shorter. We are not scared of apex predators. We grew up with them. Down's claws curled into the metal railing. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No species had ever dared. He slammed a fist onto the table. They mock us. But his heart pounded faster than he liked to admit. These weren't empty threats. Every move the humans made was precise. Every silence felt planned. Every second ticked like a countdown. Back on Earth, Commander Reed watched as data streamed in. All Varnock ships locked in net formation. Attack reported. Reed gave a single nod. Send the signal. In orbit, something shifted from the side of the human formation. 6 ships emerged, larger, thicker armored. Not for stealth. These were for message delivery. Each carried a single payload, each moved with terrifying purpose. On the Claw of Stone, Rear Commander Voss panicked. They are launching something. But it wasn't missiles. It was data bombs, massive, blinding bursts of signal interference, designed not to kill, but to blind. The Varnock fleet sensors went dark. No readings. We've lost visual. Shields. Misfiring. Systems rebooting. Down screamed, fire at everything. But no targets remained, the humans had vanished again. In the void, Kale gave the order, now. A second wave of attacks launched, smart weapons, moving like fish. In water. No fire trails, no heat signatures. One by one, Varnock ships blinked out of existence, silently. Efficiently, like a surgeon cutting infected tissue. In the Varnock command ship, chaos reigned. Down tried to speak but his voice was drowned by warnings. Sparks, smoke. He slammed his fist again. We are the apex. They should fear us. But no one listened, because in that moment, every Varnock on board tasted something new, fear, real fear, the kind that tightens your chest, the kind that whispers. You're not the predator anymore. Asterisk. Smoke filled the halls of the Varnock warship Claw of Stone. Sparks danced along the ceiling. Fires flickered in corners where systems had overloaded. Rear Commander Voss crawled through a broken doorway, his armor cracked and steaming. He coughed, dragging himself toward the command center. He wasn't a coward. No Varnock was, but right now, he just wanted to survive. The predator instinct had turned into something else, something desperate. Above Earth, the battle was almost over. Human ships moved with precision. No wasted shots. No speeches, they didn't broadcast victory. They simply removed threats. One by one, Varnock ships were disabled, their engines cut. Some were left drifting. Others exploded into silence. On board the human warship Ghost Blade, Captain Kale watched a final burst of flames on her screen. 6 remain, her second-in-command reported. 3 are surrendering. 3 are trying to run. Kale gave a nod. Let the runners go. The galaxy needs witnesses. Captain Dan stood in the middle of a shattered bridge. His own ship, Fang of Might, was barely holding together. 2 engines were gone. Power was flickering. All around him, officers lay unconscious or dead. He stared at the hologram, only a few Varnock ships left on the display. And the human fleet hadn't lost even one. Not one. Down leaned against the edge of the table, breathing heavily. How had this happened? They were the apex species. They were supposed to win. He closed his eyes for a second and remembered what the humans had said. We are not scared of apex predators. We grew up with them. He understood now. In the Earth bunker, Commander Reed stood silently while his team monitored final transmissions. One young analyst turned. They are leaving. Looks like they're running back to their core system. Reed nodded once. They'll remember. Another officer asked, do we pursue? Reed's answer was calm and firm, no. Let them carry the story. Because sometimes, fear spreads faster through silence than through fire. Far from the battlefield, Varnock Homeworld Command received the final report. A single ship had made it back. Limping. Burnt. Crippled. The officer in charge of intelligence listened in horror. They lost everything. He whispered. The survivor's voice crackled through the transmission. They never shouted. They never roared. They just dismantled us. Like they had planned it for years. They knew how we'd move. What we'd do. Every trap we use, they already had a counter. We didn't fight humans. We fought death itself. The room went cold. Meanwhile, on Earth, no celebrations echoed through the halls. No cheers. No parties, only silence, the kind that follows hard choices and deep preparation. Commander Reed sat at a desk, staring at a small, handwritten file. The title, If They Come. It was dated 20 years ago. A plan. A warning. A promise. He folded it and placed it back into a drawer. Across the stars, story spread. The Varnock were no longer the apex predators, not because they lost a battle, but because they learned there was something worse than strength. A species that survives anything. A species that plans for the worst. A species that becomes stronger the more you attack it. They weren't just warriors, they were humans. Asterisk word traveled fast. In the core systems. On trade stations, through pirate dens and peaceful colonies alike, whispers echoed across every channel. The Varnock lost. No one believed it at first. The apex species. The ones who ruled through fear and strength. They had fallen, but the evidence arrived in pieces, broken ships, damaged armor, and the most shocking of all, the silence from Varnock High Command. They weren't boasting. They weren't denying they were quiet, and that silence spoke louder than any threat. On a diplomatic station near the edge of the galactic core, leaders from several species met in a secret chamber. The Yari diplomat, long known for neutrality, leaned in. If humans did this to the Varnok, what would they do to us if we ever made the same mistake? The Drell ambassador, whose race once ruled 10 sectors, whispered, they didn't just fight. They prepared. That kind of patience, that's dangerous. An elder from the insectoid Briln race shook their antennae. They didn't fight with rage. They fought with calm. That scares me more. Back on Earth, Commander Reed met with senior leaders in a quiet underground hall. The lights were dim. The room felt heavy. A younger officer asked, should we send a warning to the other species? Reed answered, no. Should we prepare another fleet? Reed shook his head. We already have. The truth was simple, Earth had prepared for this years ago. Maybe even decades, not because they wanted war, but because they understood it would find them eventually. They had studied every known species, learned patterns, predicted behaviors, and they had waited. In a classroom on a small colony world, a young alien child asked their teacher, what's a human? The teacher paused. There was no easy answer. They look soft, the teacher said, but they are not weak. They sound kind, she continued, but they are not harmless. And if you hurt one, she said slowly, the others will come. Not for revenge. Not for chaos, they will come because they protect their own, because survival is not just instinct to them, it is memory. It is history. It is who they are. On a hidden Varnok outpost, Captain Dan sat alone inside a dim chamber, away from his shattered crew. He hadn't spoken since returning. He hadn't screamed or argued. He had just watched. Over and over, he replayed the final battle. The traps. The silence. The perfect control. He saw something he couldn't explain. Something he had never seen before in war. A force that didn't just want to win. A force that knew it would. Dan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. They weren't stronger. His officer looked up. They weren't faster. Another leaned forward. Dan stared ahead, eyes hollow. They were ready. They knew this was coming. The human fleet didn't parade their ships across alien skies. They didn't demand trophies. They simply returned home. Some called it restraint, others called it strategy, but everyone agreed on one thing: humanity had changed the rules. Across the galaxy, war councils gathered. In hidden bunkers, aboard floating cities, and inside crystal palaces, leaders met in private. Their voices were low, their faces tense. The topic was the same everywhere: humans. What were they? How had they crushed the Varnok? Could anyone else stop them? On a cold moon in Sector 4, the Creel Syndicate gathered its best minds. The Creel were masters of sabotage, subterfuge, and silent takeover. Their leader, Marlaw, slammed a metal fist on the table. We've weakened empires 10 times larger than Earth. They should be nothing. A data analyst replied, they should be, yes. But we've made the same mistake the Varnok did. Another added, we judged them by surface, by their calm voices and open trade. Marlaw narrowed his eyes. And underneath? Silence fell across the room. Then the analyst whispered, underneath is steel. Meanwhile, in the mining belt of Druska, a gathering of mercenary captains reviewed the combat footage that leaked from the Varnok wreckage. The screens played silent replays of human ships moving through space like shadows, cutting through enemy lines, jamming signals, disabling engines in a blink. One captain, scarred and brutal, leaned forward. This wasn't just military power. This was designed. Another nodded slowly. They had plans for every Varnok move, like they had faced them already. But they hadn't. Not once. Someone whispered, maybe they studied all of us. Back on Earth, Commander Reed stood in a vast, quiet chamber beneath the surface. Around him were rows of digital screens showing peaceful images, stars, colonies, ships docked safely. A young officer stood beside him. The galaxy's watching us now. Reed didn't smile. Good. They think we are dangerous. Reed turned to face him. We are. But only if they make us be. He walked to the wall, where an old plaque hung. It had a single phrase carved deep in steel, we never start the war. But we ended far away in the ruins of a Varnock War Academy, a new generation of officers trained in silence. The instructors no longer barked about Varnock's superiority. They no longer laughed at other species. Now they studied Earth. They studied failure. They studied defeat. Point 1. Instructor held up a battle report. This, he said, was our mistake. We thought fear would make them bow. But we didn't know humans. They don't bow, he said, staring at each student. They bury. At the edge of known space, deep among forgotten stars, a silent probe drifted past a lifeless world. It was human tech. Old, maybe. But still active. It sent back quiet data, small signals. Earth was watching. Not to threaten. To prepare, always preparing, because humanity had learned something long ago. The moment you look peaceful, the galaxy tests you, and Earth would never be unready again. Now, every war council across the stars carried a new rule. A rule no one said aloud, but everyone understood: if you fight humans, bring your last words. Asterisk. Years passed. The war was over, but the story remained. Tales of what happened near Earth were told in whispers, written in records, and studied in academies. Not just by the Varnock, but by every species that called themselves strong. No one forgot. Not the fleets that vanished, not the silence that came after, not the humans who never raised their voice, only their weapons. On a quiet station orbiting a neutral world, a young alien cadet read from a digital history scroll. The heading was simple: The Fall of the Apex. The cadet frowned. They were supposed to be the strongest. How did they lose so fast? His mentor, an old veteran of many battles, looked out the window at the stars. Because they didn't understand what humans are. They are clever. The cadet asked. The old one shook his head. They are survivors. They don't fight for power. They fight because they have to. In the center of the Terran Assembly Hall, Earth's leaders gathered only once each cycle. Commander Reed, older now, stepped up to the high table. No applause. Just quiet respect. He gave no long speech. Only a few lines. They called themselves Apex. But the Apex falls when it stops learning. We never stop learning. And we never stop preparing. He looked around the room. That's why we are still here. And that was all he needed to say. Elsewhere, in a deep part of space, far beyond any explored map, the last Varnock survivors gathered. Their empire, once vast, was reduced to scattered fleets and broken planets. Their pride was now memory. Captain Dan stood among them, no longer wearing armor. No rank. No flag. He watched a younger Varnock speak to the gathered crowd. The words were filled with fire and revenge, but Dan said nothing. He had learned. He had seen what came when humans were tested. He turned away from the speaker, walking into the shadows. He had no interest in a second lesson. Above a small human colony, children played under a clear sky. To them, war was just a story. A past threat. Their parents didn't talk about it often. Not because they wanted to forget, but because they had already passed down what mattered. Be ready. Be strong. Be silent until it's time to act. Across the galaxy, leaders still held meetings. Generals still trained. Fleets still grew, but under every plan, under every council decision, was one quiet question: what if the humans get involved? Because once, the galaxy had feared the Varnock. Now, the galaxy feared the quiet. They feared the calm before the storm. They feared the species that didn't yell, didn't demand, didn't boast. They feared Earth, and the name human was no longer spoken with confusion. It was spoken with caution, because in the end, the Apex didn't fall from weakness. They fell because they picked the wrong enemy. They picked us, and humanity never needed to roar. We only needed to be heard once. Asterisk.